Bom dia a todas e a todos. É um grande prazer estar aqui com todos vocês, todas vocês. Confesso que estou um pouco nervoso, tanta gente aqui, mas espero que a gente tenha uma boa discussão aí falar sobre desigualdades territoriais. Estou com o prazer aqui de estar com a Johanna e a Ute. Para quem não me conhece, eu sou Edgard Barki, sou da GV, homem branco, meia barba não bem feita, de óculos, camisa azul e um fone de ouvido que eu já sonho sempre que eu estou com esse fone de ouvido, de tanto que eu uso esse fone de ouvido. Mas a ideia é que a gente tenha uma boa discussão falando de empreendedorismo social, principalmente a questão de periferia, a questão de como que a gente está pensando em empreendedorismo social daqui para frente. E eu queria começar chamando a Johanna para ela se apresentar, fazer a apresentação dela e já começando com uma pergunta para ela falar um pouquinho, dado a atuação dela em pesquisa, como editora acadêmica da Stanford Social Innovation Review, como que ela vê o avanço do campo de empreendedorismo social no mundo e especificamente nos mercados emergentes. Muito obrigado, Johanna. Deixo a palavra com você.
Hello, everyone. My name is Johanna Mair. I'm a professor at the Hertie School in Berlin, and I'm also co-directing a research lab at Stanford, the Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society, and I'm the academic editor of Stanford Social Innovation Review. Now, social entrepreneurship and social enterprise have been very much dominating my own research agenda for the last 20 years. And I have to say, it's a really exciting moment for me to speak about that at this point in time, because it's especially these last 2 years that we really have made progress in terms of mainstreaming social enterprise also more broadly into the economy, so that also the mainstream economy business is actually looking at a social enterprise much more carefully. But especially on the policy side, we made big advances forward. There was a little bit of a hype, if you remember, especially in Latin America, around 8 years ago, when all of a sudden we saw social innovation offices bubbling up in the different countries, Peru and Colombia, and then they closed down again. Obviously, especially the tradition of social economy, a solidarity economy that comes from Latin America, has had made great inroads into also informing policy and also practice in the rest of the world. But I really see momentum now. And actually next week, the World Economic Forum takes place, and we are really proud that we are going to launch a report that actually brings for the first time together very different actors that typically don't have their own agenda, but now came together. I'm talking about the OECD, I'm talking about the EU, I'm talking about the United Nations, and so on. And we are going to publish a report, but also a specific policy call for action for policymakers, and also in a way seed also the idea that it's now time to think about mainstreaming, as I said, social economy principles, social enterprise into actually also the economy per se. So I do think we have reached an important potentially tipping point. And I'm saying this potentially because obviously we need to keep the momentum. But I think the momentum is now that we really can push forward with this. And many of you in the audience, you have been studying phenomena that are close to social enterprise, to social entrepreneurship. Ute and myself, together with others, Mair almost in 2004 started Selusi and then Sephoris. So there are many of us who basically were persistently sticking to this agenda to develop knowledge around social enterprise. And I think now it's nice to see that this knowledge and the insights that we generate can inform practice and can inform policy. So my own work has very much benefited from actually starting to study social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, social innovation in emerging markets, in developing countries. My first case study ever was actually written about an initiative in Brazil. Then I did a lot of work in India, Bangladesh. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to actually fast track my own learning curve. And the magnitude of impact that I was able to see in Brazil, in India, was much higher than the impact that I could grasp of a social enterprise in, let's say, in Europe. I'm not saying that they are not worthwhile studying, quite the opposite. But in terms of making the case of why we should study them, but the large scale of impact and the transformative potential they have, it was making me more comfortable to study phenomena that I saw much more prominently in Latin America, in Egypt, in India. And that, again, helped me a lot to also develop more research designs and inform policymakers and practice back in, OECD countries and the Western world.
Muito bom, Johanna, muito obrigado. Eu acho que foi uma boa introdução e uma visão muito boa para a gente ver a relevância que a gente tem dentro do mundo de empreendedorismo social, o impacto que pode gerar quando a gente está falando dos mercados emergentes. Eu queria chamar aqui para o painel também a Ute Stephan, para falar um pouquinho dela, falar um pouquinho da jornada dela também, que é longa. Para quem não conhece, é muito bom ver todas as publicações da Ute, e ela fala muito especificamente sobre capital psicológico, bem-estar. Então, Ute, como que a gente pode trabalhar essa questão de bem-estar, capital psicológico, quando a gente fala para empreendedores de base da pirâmide? Muito obrigado por estar aqui também, Ute.
Thank you very much, Edgar, for the nice introduction, and thank you very much for having me. It's really exciting to speak to you all, and apologies for the lack of Portuguese on my behalf. Yeah, so I'm actually a psychologist by training, and so I'm really interested in how individuals can thrive through entrepreneurship, through social entrepreneurship, but then also taking, the top-down view, if you want, how societies and contexts shape individual entrepreneurship. And if you study any entrepreneurship really from the perspective of psychology, you talk to the entrepreneurs, you realize that even for the most profit-oriented ones, there's a lot more going on than just money. And so what this other thing is, it tends to be, many people call it just happiness, but it's a sense that you're doing also something meaningful, something that's, an authentic expression of yourself. And even when work gets stressful, you can hang on to this, that, what you do matters. And when you hear that description, you probably think, well, that sounds like social entrepreneurship. And yes, so social entrepreneurship is probably a prime activity, which we haven't looked at very much from a research standpoint in terms of well-being, but I think we come to understand, and that's partly actually led by practitioners, including Ashoka, that social entrepreneurship is also particularly demanding when it comes to well-being and can really backfire. So it's almost a setting, because it's so resource constrained, and because there's always so much more you can do, right? Any social need you tackle is huge, and so it's a setting that lends itself, unfortunately, also to create burnout. So not just stress, but burnout. So the sense of, you feel over time that you don't make a difference, you become detached from your work, and in the worst case, become depressed and can't work at all any longer. So upside and downside. And in terms of base of the pyramid, I think we know really sadly very little, far too little, in terms of, from this more individual perspective. We do know that basically, I wouldn't say so much that the individuals differ, from a psychological standpoint, there is no kind of key personality trait that's different. What is very clear, what's different is that life at the base of the pyramid is much more stressful, and these stresses take a toll on individuals. And I think in terms of entrepreneurship, they particularly take a toll on the ambitions, right? We like to talk about these, change makers that break patterns, create high impact ventures. but there is a little bit of well, not a little bit, there is some risk involved, and it's much easier to take risk if you're in a secure setting and have resources and don't need to worry where money comes from tomorrow. But if you have to worry about where money comes from tomorrow, then entrepreneurship in its different forms is often more like a risk mitigating strategy. So of course, you're much closer to the social need. So in a way, base of the pyramid social entrepreneurs could make a much bigger difference, but they also have to worry about their family. And I think we all worry about our family and our survival. So I think, you know, what we're really missing there, the piece of the puzzle we're missing to empower those entrepreneurs is kind of support, and not just support in terms of, you know, training the individuals to be better entrepreneurs, but support from a systems perspective where we really create enabling contexts. So don't put just the onus on the individual. I hope that answers the question.
Sure. Mas com certeza, eu acho que a gente fala muitas vezes muito pouco sobre essa questão, fala muito da questão financeira, da questão até da formação, mas muito pouco dessa questão do capital psicológico. Então, acho que vem uma perspectiva bastante relevante para a gente. E isso está muito ligado a uma pesquisa que eu vou mostrar agora rapidinho, porque a voz é muito mais da Johanna e da Ute, mas a pesquisa foi baseada numa pesquisa internacional da Cephores. E antes de apresentar a pesquisa, talvez, Ute, se você pudesse falar um pouquinho como começou a Cephores, o que é a Cephores para o nosso público, ia ser muito bom.
I can give you my take on it, and then maybe Johanna wants to add, because I think you've been a bit longer even involved. So I think the idea was that we had a load of fascinating pieces of research back in 2005-ish, that social enterprise is interesting, that it matters, that it can make a huge impact, but we had very little systematic, large-scale understanding. And, you know, kind of to move for any field of inquiry to mature, and also for policymakers to give them tools to support social enterprises, they need to know not just about individual cases, important to know those, but it's also important to know what happens at large. And so the idea was really to create across countries comparable evidence on social enterprise and map, if you want, the social enterprise population, and then also follow them over time. So first, to know what's typical of social enterprise and what support would a typical social enterprise need, what maybe might some need that work on particular issues, others not, and then also trace that over time. So to really understand what are the success factors. So maybe, you know, there are social enterprises that you have a lot of buzz around in the initial stage, but then it's really difficult to turn that into an operating organization, or maybe that's not even the best way, right? For certain social change issues, it might be much better to disperse and collaborate and create a loose collaboration of actors that work together rather than a particular organization. But I do feel, Johanna, you might want to come in on this as well.
Yeah, happy to. So basically what you probably refer to, Barki, as Cephores, is a particular survey instrument that we developed especially as Ute came on board. It's Lucy at the time as a postdoc, and now one of the most cited professors in social entrepreneurship. So in 2004, we started the first EU-sponsored project, Lucy, which at the time was also trying to understand how social enterprises can be lead users of innovation. And later on, the Cephores, which focuses more inclusive society, was another EU-sponsored project. But as the instrument, the survey, was critical to our endeavor to develop a knowledge-based evidence that helps actually policymakers and practitioners to really understand the realities of social enterprises and also the people leading those enterprises. What we have done in Selusi is actually just focusing on 5 countries. In Cephores, we expanded that to 9 countries. And this is why we are so excited that you actually now use this instrument also in in Brazil, and it takes courage to do it because it's a work-intensive one. But at the same time, I think it's important that there are certain rigorous elements in the way how you collect data that help really to make sure that it provides evidence that can be used correctly. Now, I should also say in a broader context, because you asked me before where this is all going, elements, and we obviously are proud of that, but elements of this survey have also now found its way to another large-scale comparative assessment tool, which is ESEM, the European Social Enterprise Monitor. And it's also now, I think, in 20 countries and expanding. The difference between the Sephoris one and ESEM is that it's really this methodology. And you probably had blood, sweat, and tears, Barki, when you did the survey. But it's for a good reason, because it's also, you have to be rigorous in actually collecting the data to have to basically be sure what you actually say. And I think it's our responsibility as scholars and as academics to make sure that it's just not data that we use here on the fly, but that we actually also put this data in context, because social entrepreneurship, social enterprise manifests differently, rightly so, in different contexts, because also the societal challenges and social problems also differ according to context.
Muito bom, obrigado, Johanna, obrigado, Ute, pela introdução do Sephoris. Eu quero mostrar um pouquinho para todos aqui que estão na sala, um pouco sobre o que foi essa pesquisa. Vou mostrar só uma parte da pesquisa. Caso queiram, tem no site do Centro de Empreendedorismo e Novos Negócios da GV, ou no site da Fundação Arimax, um pouco mais da pesquisa feita aqui no Brasil, então vocês podem acessar. Eu vou mostrar um pouco do resumo da pesquisa para vocês entenderem, daí a gente continua o papo falando um pouco mais sobre essa questão do empreendedorismo social e desigualdades territoriais. Quero agradecer muito o apoio da Fundação Arimax também para o desenvolvimento dessa pesquisa aqui no Brasil, não só em termos financeiros, mas apoio realmente técnico, que foi fundamental para a gente fazer essa pesquisa, que, como a Johanna falou, ela é realmente intensiva. Vocês vão entender um pouquinho porque em 2 segundos. Aqui um pouco da equipe, então além de mim teve o Salúcio, o Guilherme, o Tomás, a Fernanda, a Nicole, que participaram dessa pesquisa aqui no Brasil, e o foco da pesquisa foi compreender algumas dimensões, eu não vou falar de todas agora, mas do perfil empreendedor, modelos de negócio, sustentabilidade financeira, uma visão sobre o ambiente, relação com beneficiários parceiros, impacto social e inovação, são alguns dos temas que a gente abordou na pesquisa. Então, faz parte da Sephoris, do projeto internacional da Sephoris. A gente fez 101 entrevistas aqui com empreendedores sociais ao longo de um ano, que foi dividido em 2 partes. Um questionário online para cada um desses 100 empreendedores de 40 minutos e mais uma entrevista por Zoom de 1h30 em média, chegou a durar 3 horas algumas vezes, com empreendedores sociais do Brasil todo. Um pouco do perfil dos seus empreendedores, vou passar rapidinho, porque eu quero o foco na Ute e Johanna depois, mas aí uma média de, na amostra, 57% de mulheres, e quando a gente fala de raça, você tem 58% branco na média, mas a questão maior é quando a gente faz a diferenciação entre empreendedores que são de periferia e de fora da periferia, que começa com a questão sociodemográfica. Então, quando a gente está falando dos empreendedores entrevistados de periferia, 70% mulheres, enquanto que fora da periferia, 48% de mulheres na nossa amostra. Importante, e conversa muito com o que a Maite falou antes, e muito dessa pesquisa conversa com o que ela falou antes. Quando a gente vai para a periferia, a gente tem na nossa amostra 87,5% se declarando como negros, pretos ou pardos, e fora da periferia 91% como brancos. Então, uma diferença bastante relevante quando a gente fala da questão racial. Em termos de satisfação, a gente vê que, em média, os empreendedores e empreendedoras colocam-se como satisfeitos com o trabalho deles, 63%, mas isso é muito maior entre os homens. 73% dos homens falam que estão satisfeitos com o trabalho. Quando a gente vai para os empreendedores negros, isso cai para 48%, e de periferia 44%. Então, entra aí toda a questão que a Ute começou falando sobre capital psicológico, como que a gente trabalha essa questão também de satisfação no trabalho, quando a gente está falando da população de empreendedores negros ou de periferia. O que mais me chama a atenção na pesquisa, apesar de não ser um dado que a gente não saiba, mas chama a atenção a profundidade do dado, pelo menos para mim, que trabalho muito com empreendedores de periferia, são alguns números aqui. Primeiro, quando a gente fala de a percepção de acesso a capital, quando a gente fala numa escala de 1 a 7, como que eles veem se está satisfatório ou não, quando a gente vai para fora da periferia dá uma média de 4,2, e quando a gente vai para a periferia 2,6. Exatamente aquilo que a Mair falou, essa dificuldade que a gente tem de acesso à capital. Ela estava falando de empreendedores negros, aqui eu estou falando de periferia, mas a gente está falando de uma dificuldade muito grande de acesso à capital desses empreendedores, principalmente de periferia. E quando a gente fala, esse para mim é um dado que, se eu for resumir toda a pesquisa em um dado só, que me chama a atenção, é este dado que quando a gente fala de capital inicial. Então, o capital inicial fora da periferia de R$700 mil e na periferia de R$19 mil. Isso dá uma diferença de 37 vezes o capital inicial para se começar um negócio. Isso, a partir daí, a gente cria várias outras diferenças relevantes nos negócios, né? A Covid também impactando muito mais os negócios, quase metade dos negócios de periferia se sentiram ameaçadas pela Covid, com uma queda de média de quase 27% na média das vendas, isso na média. Enquanto fora da periferia, menos empresas se sentiram ameaçadas e, na média, o impacto zero. Algumas ganharam, algumas perderam, na média zero. Número de clientes atendidos também muito maior quando a gente fala fora da periferia em relação à periferia. Aí tem uma soma de 35 milhões, mas como tem alguns intermediários, não é uma soma exata, mas quando a gente fala, a questão aí é como você acaba impactando, tendo uma escala muito maior quando você está fora da periferia em relação aos empreendedores de periferia, né? A estrutura também não é muito diferente, então você tem muito mais gente trabalhando nos negócios fora da periferia em relação à periferia, e aí, quando a gente fala de receitas e lucro, o que a gente percebe que é muito do que a Ute falou, da questão de potencial a risco. Então, quando você está fora da periferia, na média, você teve um prejuízo de quase R$300 mil dos negócios que a gente estudou. Quando a gente vai para a periferia, você teve que metade teve lucro, e uma média de lucro positivo, não negativo. Esse dado tem que ser tomado com certo cuidado, porque apesar de lucro parecer um dado fácil de coletar, muitas vezes a gente tinha que fazer o cálculo em conjunto com o empreendedor, então eu não diria que esse é o melhor indicador, mas o indicador de que sim, é muito mais vulnerável, você não pode correr riscos, né? Você não pode errar, você tem menos chance de ter prejuízo e alavancar seu negócio. Então, esse é o ponto essencial aí desse slide. Então, quando a gente vê na média aí, o que a gente está falando é que as receitas fora da periferia no ano anterior à pesquisa foi de 21 vezes maior, o capital inicial 37 vezes maior, a Covid impactou muito mais, tem quase 6 funcionários a mais e um impacto em termos de escala de 19 vezes mais quando a gente está falando de fora da periferia, né? Em termos de inovação, aqui só o dado que mostra, de novo, o que eu já falei, da aversão a risco. Então, quando você está falando de periferia, você tem uma maior aversão a risco do que quando você está falando de fora da periferia. E isso fica claro por todas as questões que a gente falou, tanto financeiras como de capital social, que eu não falei tanto aqui agora, mas financeiras, de capital social e até capital humano. Rapidinho, então, para as conclusões, eu passei um breve resumo, mas para entender, mas o que a gente vê é que a escala de impacto realmente é relevante na sociedade dos negócios de impacto, com milhões de pessoas impactadas, com foco muito grande na população de baixa renda, mas os focos dos empreendedores de baixa renda também ressaltam as mulheres, jovens e crianças e minorias étnicas, que são muito trabalhadas. O que a gente percebe que E daí o principal ponto, como a gente vê as desigualdades que tem nos empreendedores de periferia e fora da periferia, que são muito relevantes e que refletem todas as desigualdades sociais que a gente tem aqui no Brasil. Então, quando a gente pensa no campo de empreendedorismo social, muitas das desigualdades socioeconômicas brasileiras estão refletidas no próprio perfil dos empreendedores e na própria chance deles de escalar, crescer e ter impacto, né? Você tem um bom nível de satisfação, mas isso não é uma realidade tão grande quando a gente fala de negros e empreendedores de periferia. E o que a gente ressalta também é que os negócios de periferia são mais recentes do que fora da periferia. Isso reforça um pouco do foco que a gente tem no ecossistema mais recente quando a gente fala de empreendedorismo de periferia. Isso é uma coisa que quando a gente começa a falar mais de negócio de impacto, a gente falava pouco, e começa a se falar muito mais desde 2018, por ali, a gente começa a falar muito mais, a gente enxerga muito mais empreendedores sociais provenientes das periferias do Brasil todo. Em geral, eu não apresentei como dado, mas na pesquisa tem um pouco mais, a gente vê pouco apoio, uma percepção de pouco apoio do Estado, das empresas e do terceiro setor. Quando a gente fala de visão sistêmica, e o que a Célia falou no começo, a importância da gente ter uma visão sistêmica, de olhar os vários atores trabalhando em conjunto, ainda isso não é muito percebido pelos próprios empreendedores sociais, né? Além disso, o grau de inovação relativamente limitado, a gente vê muito mais inovações incrementais do que disruptivas na média da pesquisa como um todo, mas na periferia isso ainda mais forte pela própria aversão a risco que a gente percebeu na pesquisa. E ainda a gente percebe esse apoio relevante do ecossistema para os empreendedores sociais, para que a gente possa ter não só o mais impacto, mas como mostrei antes, mesmo os negócios fora da periferia com uma média de prejuízo bastante relevante. Então, como que a gente consegue ter esse apoio para não só fomentar o empreendedorismo de periferia, mas também fora da periferia, para que a gente tenha um equilíbrio melhor entre o ganho financeiro e o impacto social, e podendo fazer com que os empreendedores possam inovar mais e de forma mais sistêmica, né? Basicamente, o principal ponto meu aqui é que a desigualdade que a gente vê no país, ela é refletida no ecossistema de negócio de impacto, então a gente vê isso muito claramente, e que a gente percebe que essa visão sistêmica, esse trabalho no indivíduo é muito importante. Então, como que a gente pode ter uma visão um pouco diferente desse ecossistema, para ele não simplesmente replicar a sociedade, mas realmente a gente conseguir criar um ecossistema que possa ter uma mudança sistêmica, e não apenas mudanças individuais. Não sei se eu fui rápido, mas me deram 10 minutos para falar, e eu tentei ficar nesses meus 10 minutos de glória. Agora passo a glória para quem merece, que é a Ute e a Johanna. Quem quiser ter mais informações, como eu falei, tem pode acessar a pesquisa como um todo. E agora, não sei se eu estou... Isso. Muito bem. Johanna, Ute, vocês podem entrar aí, mas como vocês quiserem falar, mas queria de vocês entender, na percepção de vocês, pela pesquisa de vocês, como vocês veem que a gente pode alavancar mais inovação social originada dos empreendedores sociais, principalmente empreendedores sociais da base da pirâmide. Então, como que, na perspectiva de vocês, pelas pesquisas de vocês, a gente pode alavancar mais essas inovações sociais? Então, não sei, Ute, Johanna, quem quiser começar a falar.
Well, I can just do a brief introduction and then hand over to Johanna. So I think it's really important to see these findings. So first of all, Edgard, really kind of congratulations for you and your team for, you know, implementing this, using the data and putting them so nicely together. And really, I think it's one of the first studies that really draws attention to this tension, right? Of what does it mean? The individuals who are closest to the social issue on the periphery are perhaps the ones who don't have the resources and skills and opportunities to really take, this knowledge forward and translate it into sustainable organizations. So I think just drawing attention to this very fact that there is a difference between the bottom and the top of the pyramid, or however you want to term it, is really, really important. And I think it opens the way to think through more carefully. So, how can we support base of the pyramid periphery social entrepreneurs? And I know that you've also written on this, but I just to kind of make one really important point is that, like any social change effort, and actually Johanna and I have written a whole paper on how you create positive social change, it's not going to happen overnight, right? There is what we term a surface route to a social change, but that's not applicable here. That has to do with nudging and all of these things. But I think here what we really need is kind of a approach that looks at all the change levers. And what I mean with this is that we know from research across many different disciplines that any individual or group needs three things to change their behavior. And the first one is maybe the most obvious. So people need to be motivated, right? There needs to be some sort of willingness to be a social entrepreneur. And I think we see from your data that clearly that's there. So next to motivation, people also need to be able, right? So in terms of capabilities and skills. And I think that's where, and I know your organization, Edgard, is actually doing, outreach programs. So, kind of get a little bit more business skills, get a little bit more learning around business models and, impact strategies. I think that's the skill element, and that's perhaps relatively easy to do. But then there is kind of the more, how to create opportunities for individuals really to be social entrepreneurs and don't, not at the cost to their own life, to their own family, and, how to enable them. And I think these enabling conditions, these opportunity structures, that really needs an ecosystems approach, for lack of a better word, right? That needs kind of some, how to funnel access to finance in an easy way so that, people are not screened out when they don't have a long track record of, credit card transactions or anything like that that banks look for. So how do you make the system a little bit more risk loving in terms of willing to invest and work with the entrepreneurs in the periphery and give them more often the benefit of the doubt? Because I think that's essentially what we're looking at, right? If we're giving people a bit more the benefit of the doubt, we probably are able to level up a large group from the base of the pyramid. And really then, I think from a social enterprise perspective, probably, these are the entrepreneurs that can create really good solutions to social needs, because one of the things we see in our large-scale review of how how you may instigate social change successfully is that you really need to work from within the system. You don't come from the outside and say, here, I have a solution for you, but you try and understand local infrastructure, local support structures, local collaboration structures, and kind of level them up. I'll hand over to Johanna.
There's a little that I can add here on the substance, and this was really a remarkable also synthesis on a even more remarkable study. I'm really grateful you did this study, and specifically, and this really makes us super proud that you realize the idea behind Sephora is really to make sure that we understand the differences in context of social enterprise. And I'm really excited to see this work, because for years, for almost now 2 decades that I'm doing this, I'm trying to understand how can we make sure that people understand the importance of what you call social enterprise in the periphery. And I think it's important to also to adopt a little bit of an agenda here, and I would call it an emancipatory agenda that we all should be part of in this field of practice. And it has to do that also with my own observation. I'm also a member of the Schwab Foundation, and we select social enterprises in different countries. Arguably in Brazil, we have a partner that selected for us, but what we really would like to see is exactly more social enterprises from the periphery. But what all often holds them back, holds us or others back to see them, is that we underestimate the privilege that it's baked into what makes some social enterprise and entrepreneurs shine on a more global space. And I think this requires an explicit effort to see, to really see. And your study helps us to see those social enterprises. And I would really encourage you all here on the call to write more about them. Send me also examples of social enterprises that you find that are doing great work. Because it's our all collective job to make sure this is understood. Now more from a more scholar or researcher point of view, what is obviously interesting, and this also takes it back to conversation to what Ute mentioned as our objective with Sephora, is we hope that you, Barki, and the colleagues will actually do this study also in a few years. That doesn't have to be next year, but in a few years, because what we really need to pay attention how this evolves, right? So what you have now is a snapshot in time, but we would also need to understand how this evolves, whether, as I said, like 20 years ago, it was really the hidden populations that we often talk in Sephora. We want to get to the hidden population. We could not get to them. What is also interesting is also how that shift actually changes. What is the role of us educators and researchers in this? And also interesting, how does our own perception of what is periphery shift over time? And I'm saying this as someone who is interested in social systems, and I think us as researchers in studying social systems, we have to be damn careful about two things. What are the boundaries of the social system we study, and what also are some of the power relationships that actually we see. But again, congratulations, and obviously I'm super proud that SSIR Brazil is going to feature this. And for those of you who don't know, we have been on this journey of creating local language editions at SSIR. We have now a Spanish-speaking one, and we're super proud that we have a Brazilian one, we have a Japanese, we have a Korean. But the idea is really to lower the entry points for you all to participate in this global dialogue, to make sure that we have content that is really specific to Brazil, but also ultimately that this content, and again, is made accessible to our larger global audience. And thank you.
Muito obrigado, Ute e Johanna. O Sephora também é uma pesquisa internacional, né, em vários países. Como vocês veem a importância desse cross-cultural, pesquisas cross-cultural, como que vocês veem isso, quais são os desafios, a relevância, porque aqui a gente falou de um contexto brasileiro que já tem várias diferenças quando a gente fala de periferia e fora da periferia. Como vocês veem essas pesquisas de vários países? Eu sei que vocês fazem bastante, então é até para ajudar a gente a pensar como que a gente pode entrar mais em pesquisas internacionais e fazer mais parte dessas pesquisas.
I personally think we need to just be very smart and using every vehicle that we have at our disposal, right? And SSIR is just one of them. Academic conferences are another one, but there are more and more convenings that are actually also focusing on this sweet spot between academia and practice, because it's also about informing policy. And this is why I think all of us can have an active role in creating those spaces that we actually learn more about others. One, I took notes while listening to Barki, obviously. And one interesting idea that came to mind is also like, how do we make the Brazilian finding and the specificities in terms of periphery, non-periphery, and obviously very important the racial aspect in the phenomena. How would that be? Could we make that portable at the more conceptual or higher level to other countries? So how would a similar kind of situation look like, let's say, in Africa? right? Where the issue might be a little bit different, but in a way often very similar. Because what we have in Africa, we have a tendency in the social innovation as a practice field that a lot of attention goes to initiatives that are again founded by someone who is, let's say, from Uganda or from Nigeria. But typically these people are coming, they were abroad and come back, and they come back with also the money trusted to them because they were abroad, right? And so cracking that pattern, I think it's also something important if we really want to actually empower local initiatives. And it's really interesting also, if I may just add one thing, to look at this over time. And it made me smile because I also realize how old I get. But 20 years ago, the term at that time, unfortunately, the term was bottom of the pyramid came up. And it was very much promoted by a dear friend, C.K. Prahalad, with very good intention that we have to pay attention to the bottom of the pyramid as a market opportunity for businesses. No? And at the time, Christian Selos and I had already started to study social enterprises that basically are locally bound and study local problems. And we thought, like, this cannot be, we cannot have a conversation about the base or the bottom of the pyramid without paying attention to actually the energy and the initiatives that are really there, that have been there for a long time. No? And so we embarked at the time at this Mission Impossible to say, base of the pyramid, we have to think about, if we even bring the private sector in, we need to talk about the joint models, where social enterprises work with social enterprises, and we have given much more attention to social enterprises because this is also where companies can learn from how to operate at the local level. And in the beginning, it was really a hard sell, and Barki, you mentioned about also some of the difficulties that you all have find in publishing, but also for us, it was almost impossible to get through with that idea. And then, as Ute said also before, in a more private setting, it's sometimes ideas take time, and when the time is ripe, they really kick in. So we were ultimately able to publish this, and at the same time we won the IFC Financial Times Award from actually finally putting the social enterprises in conversation with base of the pyramid. So I just kind of can encourage you to be persistent and because and not give up, and know exactly that you are on the right, putting the right triggers and studying the right phenomena. It's just sometimes the others are not ready for it, but they will be, because time is on our side, and unfortunately the world also is developing, and fortunately that this is going to be seen also more importantly.
Very good, muito bom. Johanna, muito obrigado. Ute, não sei se você quer falar um pouco mais sobre essa questão, ou até uma questão que a Johanna trouxe, que é essa questão da colaboração local, como você vê a colaboração local dos empreendedores sociais, do ecossistema, para que a gente tenha mais um bottom-up e não um top-down, né? Como que a gente pensa mais de baixo para cima e não de cima para baixo.
So I think local collaboration is really essential and building things from the bottom up, as it were, right? And I think that's really, I appreciate that's really easy to say and very difficult to do. But I think, I think we're no longer living in a world where you can just come in and say, oh, here is how you should do X. And I think we all know that doesn't work. That doesn't work in, international aid, that doesn't work in entrepreneurship, because all of this is locally rooted. It's the people in the end, and people, live in communities, and we need to build from there. So yeah, I can just reinforce that. Maybe just because you asked earlier around the international comparison, and I just want to share a few bits on that, because I think that's quite similar actually to the, you can't any longer import solutions for the social enterprises. And similarly, I think we're now, fortunately, and I guess the time is right in Johanna's words, living in an era where I think also in research, we are no longer happy with just saying, okay, what anybody found in Western Europe or in Northern America goes for everybody. And for that, I think we do need global studies that are carried out in different countries together with local researcher teams. And because that helps us to contextualize, that helps us to question and push our theories. And here really the local collaboration is very important. Also, you know, checking translations, all the methodological aspects, but also adding questions like you did around, you know, well, what about the periphery? What about ethnicity? That are sometimes not obvious to researchers who are, you know, living in more developed countries and perhaps in a privileged big city, you know. And then the other aspect, so I think it helps to push our knowledge boundary forward. It makes findings more generalizable. It's also a really good tool to communicate with policymakers, and including not just so there's one argument to be said that different countries are almost like a natural experiment in terms of different regulation institutions, cultures. So, you know, to understand that, sometimes you have to contrast countries. You can't change institutions or culture. That's nothing, you know, you can't do that. So it's interesting from that for policymakers. And vice versa, it's also interesting if you find the same thing. And just to give you one example across different countries, because that indicates it's really a trend you need to pay attention to. And just to give you one example for that, during COVID, I, together with over 30 researchers, we instigated a study on entrepreneurship and COVID and entrepreneurs' well-being. And Barki was part of that for Brazil, so thank you very much. And what really came out, and these are commercial mainstream entrepreneurs, right? And what really came out that one of the key opportunities they saw in the middle of the crisis was around sustainability, around inclusive business models, and, you know, pushing forward social and economic concerns. And so to present something like that to, you know, from commercial entrepreneurs to a policy audience or even to mainstream entrepreneurs and say, well, your stereotype is they're all interested in money, and even more so when the times are tough, as in COVID. No, actually what you see is a willingness to experiment and, you know, to create more and help to work towards more inclusive societies as a business opportunity. And I think that connects very much with what we had at the beginning of this discussion, is that really the time is right to, you know, have a good understanding of social enterprises, help them grow, but also take that knowledge to say, well, now it's time for the whole economy to engage in this.